Opening day in the future tense, and now we are into this season, and sometimes it gets a little tense around Camden Yards. It certainly did much of the weekend as big leads were blown in every direction, and on Sunday afternoon it all kind of caught up with the Orioles and Darren O'Day, as well as the Wade Miley experiment. Luke Jones was on the scene for every inning of Oriole baseball during the homestand last week. Pre-game, post-game, Buck Showalter, Adam Jones, and even Caleb Joseph passing some internet humor on to Luke Jones prior to Sunday's game. You know, they're 4-1, right? I mean, there's nothing to be sad about, but certainly Sunday was one of those games where they snatched a defeat out of the jaws of victory, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. But then on the flip side, the Yankees had a 4-run lead on Friday night and a 3-run lead on Saturday. It was just kind of, as you mentioned, back and forth baseball. It wasn't necessarily great baseball over the weekend.
It was like hot potato. Here, you take it.
Yeah,
I don't want to win.
Yeah, so, but hey, they're 4-1. To put it in football terms, they have a nice halftime lead in Week 1. If you're talking about an NFL schedule, 5 games in, it's nothing. But hey, you'd much rather be 4-1 than 1-4. I think. I'm not sure we've learned a whole lot about this team through the first week. I think they hit some home runs. They didn't really tear the cover off the ball overall. A few guys swinging the bats, okay, but nothing that really stands out. The bullpen had been exceptional until Sunday, and when you're asked to pitch 16 2/3 scoreless innings over the first 4 games, that's going to catch up with you. You're going to pay the piper at some point, and certainly that came to fruition on Sunday. The starting pitching to this point, save for Dylan Bundy, has been pretty forgettable. I think Kevin Gausman's control issues, that's been surprising. I think Wade Miley, as much as he's a guy who doesn't inspire a lot of faith, he generally has not been someone who's walked hitters in his career. His career walk rate right around 2.7, 2.8 per 9 innings. That's pretty good. So to see him walk 7 on Sunday, I think the biggest thing about Sunday, one, and we'll talk about Darren O'Day a little bit because I think that's something to be concerned about, but 2, they walked 11 hitters. Frankly, they were fortunate to be in that game late in the game. You walk 11 hitters, you're normally looking at being completely blown out, but the Yankees didn't.
That's kind of embarrassing. It better never get worse, right? They will walk 11 guys the rest of the year.
Yeah, they're going to have some games where they walk some hitters, but you hope 11. You would hope that's a season high. Yeah, that's pretty extreme, even for a bad pitching staff, and certainly Miley walked 7 of those. So it's not as though the entire bullpen had major issues, as Darren O'Day specifically in the 9th inning, but they just, they really rode their bullpen hard through the first 4 games. They had the 2 off days, so that allowed them to pitch Britton and Brock in each of their first 4 wins. Buck, wisely, smartly, I 1,000% agree, stayed away from them on Sunday, give them a chance to get Sunday and the off day before they go to start the road trip in Boston. So when you don't have your 2 best relievers, when you have a very mediocre outing from your starting pitcher, it's going to be really tough to win if you don't score runs. And, the Orioles only scored 3 runs, and the final 14 Baltimore hitters retired. It adds up to a loss. It's not something to dwell on, but it wasn't tough to see that coming based on the fact that they had used their bullpen so much over the first 4 games. You just, if you're going to get 3 or 4 short starts in a row, you just can't keep asking the bullpen to be perfect. And, the floodgates certainly opened late in Sunday's game.
I've seen some stuff defensively, and I think, Trumbo not running down a ball in right field, and the batter winds up getting on. They wind up not scoring runs. But it's little stuff like that defensively is going to drive Buck crazy, right? Because, no one is more buckled down on defense than Buck Showalter and wants that. And I think that this team had that in 13, 14, 15. It's kind of gotten away a little bit from where nobody could run on Matt Wieters. I think more tread on the tire for guys like Jones who are pretty good defenders. This is not the best defensive bunch.
Well, I think the infield defense is still exceptional. J.J. Hardy's not quite what he was a few years ago, but Manny Machado is as good as anyone at any position in baseball. Scopes had a couple issues with throws. He had the kind of baffling throw that he tried to make on Sunday. But overall, Sunday I agree. overall, their defense, I thought, had been really good through the first 4 games. I mean, I think the corner outfield defense, that's not anything new. I mean, that's something they've been dealing with the last couple of years. And, when Joey Rickard and Craig Gentry are out there, the corner outfield defense will be better. But, those guys, you're not going to want to have out there from an offensive standpoint unless you're facing a left-handed starting pitcher. So you're going to deal with some of that. I think Seth Smith has looked solid in right field. Kim catches everything he gets to for the most part. He just doesn't have a whole lot of range out there. So, I'll agree with the defense being an issue certainly on Sunday, but I don't think it's been I think it's been pretty good over the first 4 games.
But it is something that's going to cost them at some point, and you hope it's not at an inopportune time, and into the bullpen and into the hot part of the season. It's just. We weren't worried about that a couple of years ago. I tend to be a little more worried about that with this team than in previous years.
No, fair enough. I mean, I'm not worried about the infield defense at all.
I agree with that.
I'm not terribly concerned about Wellington Castillo because I think some of his flaws were frankly flaws that Matt Wieters has at this point in his career. So I think Castillo, he throws well. Doesn't block pitches exceptionally well, but I don't think Wieters did that. Has done that particularly well the last couple years. Neither are great. Neither are great with presentation, pitch framing, whatever you want to call it, with some of those metrics. So I'm not as concerned there. But the corner outfield defense, that's been the case going back to the Travis Snyder, Alejandro De Aza, Steve Pierce. You go down the list, Nolan Reimold. That 2015 where the corner outfield situation was a dumpster fire all the way around. They're better offensively at the corner outfield spots now. I think that's pretty clear, but that's still going to be an issue. But overall, I mean, infield defense, which is what this team is one of its calling cards. I still think it's going to be really good. And we haven't even mentioned them, but I think Chris Davis over this homestand was just phenomenal with scooping low throws out of the dirt. He probably saved probably 4 or 5 potential errors from some low throws from some infielders. But overall, I mean, the corner outfield spots, Adam Jones isn't Kevin Kiermaier or Kevin Pillar in center field, but he's still strong out there overall. So it's going to be something that they're not going to steal as many outs as maybe they did a few years back. But other than those corner outfield spots, I still think they'll be pretty strong defensively.
Luke Jones joining us here talking all things baseball as the Birds head to Fenway and then off to Toronto. The Caps will be in Toronto next week as well. The Red Sox will be in Toronto when the Caps are there next week. And for the division and for Tillman being injured, I know I'm talking to a bunch of Red Sox people about Price and about their bullpen and about their flu situation up there. Then you see Donaldson go down for the Blue Jays. But the Gary Sanchez thing for the Yankees over the weekend, boy, that was kind of excruciating for that. Not that I shed any tears for the Pinstripers, but, their season's taken sort of a weird trajectory already, right?
Yeah, you just said it. There's a lot of turmoil in this division right now. I mean, the Orioles have had their issues that we've, Joey Rickard goes on the DL on Sunday, although that's not going to be something that they consider to be long-term. But Tillman being the big one. You mentioned the Red Sox. I mean, the Red Sox have had all kinds of issues. I mean, they were able to get a win in Detroit on Sunday, but they've had bereavement. They've had the flu. They've had the Price injury. Pomerantz, who's going to start against the Orioles, he's had some issues with his arm and had a really some adversity in the spring. That's a team that clearly we've all kind of earmarked to be the class of the division, but right now they've got some questions. I mean, Toronto, they start the season 1-5. So, but you mentioned with Gary Sanchez, just a shame to see that. I'm like you. I'm not going to shed any tears for Yankees fans, but you're talking about a dynamic, great young player. I mean, we saw what he did last year. I mean, he had 20 home runs and a very small sampling.
He's a guy you want to see play in the game, right? Period.
Right. I mean, I don't want to see players hurt. And I understand when you see the opposition have players, and we talk about this in football all the time with the way injuries are such a big part of that sport. But I want to see each team at full strength, and see if you have what it takes. And to see Sanchez go down, really awkward the way it was. I mean, there wasn't anything weird about the swing.
Yeah, he just swung the bat. I mean,
yeah,
literally.
I mean, we've seen that before with when a guy breaks a hamate bone or something like that. Remember, Markakis did that a few years back. But typically you don't see something like that where it's a bicep issue. So you hope for the best with that long term for him. But clearly they put him on the DL, and for a Yankees team that I think that's an interesting team. I don't know how good they're going to be. I believe I pegged them to be in fourth place, right around 500. I think they're going to have some stretches where they play really well because they do have some exciting young players, and Ronald Torres clearly had some big hits against the Orioles over the weekend. They have some exciting young players, but you still look at that rotation beyond Tanaka. There are some questions there. Pineda's got a big arm. Severino's got a big arm. Sabatia's barely holding on at this point.
He feels like a shell watching him out there working, laboring out there on Sunday.
88. I mean, and to his credit, he's made it work a little bit better than some who really lose their fastball at the end of their career, but he's clearly not the guy he was 6-7 years ago. So I still look at that Yankee team, even though they got the great back end of the bullpen. That's a team that still has some flaws that I'm not sure they're going to be able to overcome. But easily the biggest surprise so far. I guess give the Rays a nod at 5-2, but Toronto's starting 1-5, and the Orioles got them off on the wrong foot, but that's surprising so far. So I mean, it's the first week, but I'm not sure there's anything earth-shattering beyond some of the injuries that you mentioned. But overall, I think most of us expected this to be a competitive division, maybe not knowing what would happen with Tampa Bay, and lo and behold, the Rays are off to a decent start.
Thumbs up on Seth Smith, right? If we're doing thumbs up or thumbs down and trending in the right direction, certainly a good week for him as an Oriole.
Yeah, and this is why I said from the get-go, I don't know what kind of year Seth Smith's going to have in reality. I mean, he is an older player.
You probably do know what kind of year he has. He's very consistent. He hit 260, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what he's going to do, right?
He's going to play against right-handed pitching. He shouldn't really play against left-handed pitching. He has a 600 career OPS against lefties. I mean, he's a platoon guy. I mean, he is. There's no reason for him to, if he's having more than maybe 40 or 50 plate appearances against lefties this year, I kind of question what Buck Showalter's doing then, unless they have a lot of injuries in the outfield. But, he's a guy who has a career 340, 345 on-base percentage. He'll hit, probably playing at Camden Yards, he's got a decent chance to hit 15 home runs, somewhere in that neighborhood. And, he's going to have a decent average, certainly a good average against right-handed pitching. So I think I said from the get-go I was a big fan of that trade. I was not a Gallardo fan. I know his first start with the Mariners was pretty typical of what we saw last year with the Orioles. Only made it through 5 innings.
I watched part of that one the other night.
Yeah. I mean, Gallardo, it's clear that he's a shell of what he was a few years ago. It's clear that signing was a big thumbs down by Dan Duquette. But I think as much as you try to make lemonade out of lemons, I think Duquette was able to do that here because I think Seth Smith is a nice addition for this team. Doesn't have speed, but works counts, has good at-bats. We certainly saw that with the big home run he hit on Friday night. With a guy on third base, less than 2 outs, you're thinking he's just going to hit a fly ball and ends up hitting one over the out-of-town scoreboard. But I think he's someone who gives this lineup a little more balance. He's not going to hit a ton of home runs, but will give them quality at-bats. Gives them someone else to pair with the likes of Hyun-Soo Kim. Give this lineup a little more balance and not just the two outcomes of home run or strikeout that you tend to have with a lot of these guys.
He is Luke Jones. You can follow his journey at Baltimore. Luke at on Twitter, and, of course, Luke at WNST.net. All things baseball and the Orioles. A little bit of downtime here. Short trip to Boston. Kind of weird, these 2-game series with Toronto last week, Boston this week. But they'll have 4 against Toronto this week, and then Boston comes in here, or it goes into Toronto next week, I should say. For you with this Red Sox team, in sort of previewing it, I've talked to a couple people up in Boston. It really is uncanny. You talk about all the bad luck and Sanchez and all that stuff. Boy, the Red Sox have had virtually everything go wrong the first week and a half, right?
Oh, it's been amazing. I mean, they've had so many. The Orioles have had some players that have dealt with the flu, and Darren O'Day missed some time. Perhaps that's contributed to the struggles he's had in his first 2 outings where he's looked pretty terrible, just very uncharacteristic. But the Red Sox, half their lineup has missed time with the flu. We've talked a lot since going back to the early spring training with David Price. With him, I mean, he's throwing again, kind of, but it's still not looking like a guy who's close to coming back. Looking like a timetable, probably not terribly far off from Chris Tillman. And Tillman, they're saying early May, best case scenario. I mean, he's doing well, progressing, but not where he needs to be yet. This Red Sox team, they have so much, but they're searching right now. Thornburg, who was their big acquisition for the bullpen, he's hurt. So they've kind of just been, they've done okay for themselves. I mean, they're hovering right around 500 as they go into the series with the Orioles that'll start Tuesday night, as they were in Detroit over the weekend. But they're trying to get themselves, get their bearings, so to speak, early in the season. So, every team's going to have this kind of stuff. You hope not to have that much going on.
Well, I hope we don't have the flu and a bunch of people dying in their family. It's been fluky, quite frankly, for the first week. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you've heard a lot about that. I mean, it's just been been one of those springs. There were quite a few teams I know that dealt with that, but the Red Sox kind of just hammered them right here at the end of spring, start of the first week of the season. So, that team's going to hit. We know that. I mean, there's certainly questions about how that lineup feels with David Ortiz no longer being the heart and soul, the anchor of that lineup. But for losing Ortiz, they add Andrew Benintendi, who certainly is off to a big start, and Betts and Bogarts and go down the list. Jackie Bradley's banged up right now, but saw what kind of year he had last year. Pablo Sandoval's back, even though he's off to a slow start. He had a good spring, so they're going to hit. We know what their rotation looks like if it's at full strength. They certainly have the depth that even if David Price doesn't pitch at a high level or doesn't pitch the whole most of the season or whatever he ends up dealing with his elbow, they still have enough to endure there. And I think that bullpen will be okay. For all the success he's had, Craig Kimbrell can make you sweat if you're a Red Sox fan. If you've seen him. But
bring back Koji 5 years ago if I'm them, right?
Yeah. I mean, Kimbrell. Like I said, he got into some trouble on Sunday. I know that, but I mean, he's still got a great arm. Still going to be a really good closer. But I still wonder about the depth. They did have some turnover in that pen, as you mentioned. Uehara no longer with them, so they're still my favorite. I'm not going to waver from that after 1 week and knowing what they've been dealing with here recently, but. I kind of thought Toronto would be the team that might be able to challenge them a little more than people expect, but the Blue Jays have been a mess early on. So, we kind of talk about these games. You try not to draw any sweeping conclusions over the first 6-7 weeks.
Yeah, haven't played a road game yet, for crying out loud.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all talk about this. You kind of come up for air at Memorial Day as long as you don't do anything like, lose your first 21 like they did in 1988 or lose 16 of 18 like they did in 2010. You kind of see where teams are by Memorial Day, and for the most part, you get a pretty good idea of who teams are. So, for the Orioles, good start, disappointing outcome on Sunday. But even then, my only real takeaway beyond the obvious that, you can't have 3 straight starts where you don't get deep into games. It's just it's gonna add up for your bullpen, and certainly we saw that Sunday. But probably my biggest takeaway, Miley with the walks, that's so out of character for him in his history. I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt, at least to a degree, even though I have my doubts about how effective he can be in general. But Darren O'Day, he's walked 5 batters in 2 innings of work. That's and keep in mind, last year he had the injuries, had the hamstring and the shoulder. And when you think about Darren O'Day's delivery, I mean, we're not talking about a typical pitcher here. We're talking about a guy who uses his whole body with that submarine delivery. You wonder last year with the injuries if that, if they're not that he's hurt necessarily, but he's approaching his mid-30s now. I mean, this isn't a young pitcher. You do wonder if there's some long-term effect there that maybe not, can't get the same kind of movement, same kind of angle for his pitches, all of that. And, he's someone who walked some hitters last year. His walk rate was a career high last year in the, half the season that he did pitch. So I'm not going to.
Well, it's not as automatic as we thought it was 2 years ago, right?
I'm not. Believe me, this isn't me saying I'm writing him off. Darren O'Day has a long enough track record that he could come back as early as Tuesday and be fine and post a sub-2 ERA this year. But he's older. He's coming off of an injury-plagued season, and he hasn't looked crisp. His spring numbers were fine. Didn't really have any issues with walks, but 5 walks in 2 innings. That's alarming for a guy that you're counting on to get major outs for you, and he certainly was not able to do that on Sunday.
All right, to the football side of things, Ladarius Webb back into the fold. I know we don't, have a ton of Ravens news or information, but that was rumored to be going on, and Nick Mangold was rumored to be going on, and that didn't go on. We had the Liars luncheon last week. We're still 3 weeks out on this. Ravens doing some business here still.
Yeah, and the Webb re-signing had been talked about. Had really picked up steam over the last 3-4 days, and then over the weekend. Even though the Ravens didn't announce it on Saturday, but the reports came in that they'd agreed to a 3-year deal. A max value of $10.5 million. I'm sure a lot of that's phony money. Probably incentives that are not likely to be earned. But I think with Webb, beyond the fact that it clearly gives them some depth behind Eric Weddle and Tony Jefferson at safety, I'm intrigued to see what this could do for them from a versatility standpoint. I've talked about this a lot with Jefferson. He's so good against the run. He's really good at covering tight ends. I wonder with Webb, do you have the option now where you could play a little more dime package than Dean Pease has used over his tenure as Ravens defensive coordinator? And if you do that, what does that mean? You don't need to replace Zach Orr with a 3-down linebacker anymore. You can replace him with more of a 2-down linebacker, which, as you know, is much easier to find. It's very difficult to find linebackers who are good in coverage. So if you can have Webb playing a deep center field safety, if you go to a dime package on 3rd down in obvious passing situations, you can slide Jefferson down to a dime spot where he can help out if other teams try to change it up and run the football because he's so good against the run, and then he can match up against opposing tight ends, and he excels in that area of the field. So I really like the Webb re-signing because of the potential versatility that it can bring, more so than even just stating the obvious with it's nice to have a veteran safety with some experience now to back up your 2 starting safeties. So, a good signing there. We'll see what happens with Nick Mangold. I know they had a good visit, but I think this is a case of how much do the Ravens like the player? How much do they like him for what he's asking from a salary standpoint? And if you're Nick Mangold, really accomplished player, has had a long career, has made some real money in the NFL. I'm sure he wants to continue playing, or he wouldn't be taking a free agent visit like he did this past week. But it's got to be the right fit for him as well. So doesn't mean that a deal won't come together, but I think both sides have displayed some patience here, and we'll see how it plays out in the coming days and weeks.
Nick Mangold, disappointing for the Ravens. I think we're all wondering whether he can play. Certainly the intellect, the age, we talked about that last week. That has to play out, but it feels still like it could happen, right?
Yeah, and I was just saying that I think this is a case where you have 2 sides who very clearly have. The Ravens need a starting center. They'd clearly like to have a veteran. That's just been their DNA. For every Gino Gradkowski that they've tried and frankly failed in developing, they've had a match.
But they don't lose these battles much when they want a free agent. If they really want him, they'll have usually, right? You don't usually hear somebody say, "Well, he picked the Chargers over the Ravens or whatever," right?
Yeah, and that's part of it. I know there's there had been some discussion a couple weeks ago that the Giants were interested, but for the most part, at least what's out there that's been reported, and of course we never truly know. There doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of movement on Nick Mangold, so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Like I said, I think the Ravens, how much do they like the player, not the name, not the experience. That goes without saying, and clearly he played under Marty Morningwig when he was the coordinator with the Jets, so he's experienced with what the Ravens are going to do offensively. But how much are the Ravens in love with what he is as a player, and coming off of that ankle injury that cost him half of the season last year. And in the case of Mangold, how much are the Ravens going to be willing to offer that makes sense for him? I mean, this is a guy who's made money. You could certainly say he wants to win. You could certainly debate how close the Ravens are to being a Super Bowl championship caliber team. I think they still have a heck of a lot of work to do on their offense for that to be something that you really point to as being a reality. But if they feel good about him, if he feels good about it, I could see a deal falling into place, or I could see the Ravens waiting it out and perhaps waiting to see if they can find someone in the draft that they like, or who knows? I mean, you could see another center somewhere else shake free. We see those post-draft cuts quite often, and the Ravens have even added guys of that ilk in the past. So, again, no real urgency to get a deal done, or it would have been done last week when these sides visited, but I get the sense that the door's still open there, that something could come together.
Last thing for you on the drafting side of things. I've seen many mock drafts lately that have the Ravens drafting one of the wide receivers, or a right tackle. The kid out of Wisconsin has shown up on several mock drafts, including Mel Kiper's. It is amazing because for 3 months you and I have been talking about their needs at pass rusher, their needs at cornerback. I would be blown away, but it feels like they're as likely to take a tackle or as a wide receiver as maybe a pass rusher or a corner, where we know there's more depth there.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the right tackles, and there's been the talk of Ramsick, or it's just, I'm not hot and bothered by that. A right tackle in the first round. I guess mainly because you look at some of the tackles that have been taken in the first round over the last 6-7 years, and it's all signs point to Ronnie Stanley being a really good one, and that's good news for the Ravens. Don't get me wrong, but as far as the guys that are there, this isn't a strong tackle class, and I don't know if there's some hangover there, that the fact that you just had Rick Wagner, who was a fifth-round pick, and you saw what he was able to become in a relatively short period of time. I mean, he was an above-average right tackle in his second season.
Yeah, he got on the field quickly.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the good ones usually do, which is what made us nervous about Elam and which makes us nervous about Brashad Perryman, because rarely do guys figure it out in year 3 or 4, really, right?
Right. So that's why I guess, talking about Cam Robinson or Ryan Ramsey, I'm not excited about that idea. I mean, hey, I'm not a talent evaluator, so if they think that's the 16th best player or whoever they have ranked at the top of their board when they're on the clock, then so be it. But, certainly you look at edge rusher. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about those guys. Wide receiver, whether it's, Mike Williams or Corey Davis or John Ross. Certainly those three have all been linked to the Ravens via mock drafts, and certainly Williams and Ross have visited with the Ravens. So I don't think that's out of the question whatsoever. I still look at edge rusher. I still look at corner. The Ravens at this point, they have enough needs still on either side of the ball, even though they've clearly been geared towards upgrading their defense via free agency. And haven't done as much with their offense, so that would lead you to believe, okay, they'll probably be looking offense. There's still edge rush, and there's still corner that they could conceivably go to even in the first round, even though they've addressed the cornerback position. So there's still so many needs there. There's still so many positions that they really could stand to address that it's hard to pinpoint it. When they're picking sixth, like they did last year, you only had to look at the top 7 or 8 players and say, okay, one of these guys are most likely going to be a Raven. This year, there's such variance. There's such a great collection of talent here that I could see any number of things happen. I still wouldn't be shocked to see the Ravens move up a few spots. Hypothetically, if they covet one of those pass rushers, if they covet one of those receivers specifically, just say hypothetically, if they really love Corey Davis because he kind of checks the boxes of what they're looking for in a wide receiver, and he does. He runs good routes, good intermediate guy. Seems to fit perfectly with what they need, and not a possession receiver, but an intermediate kind of receiver. If they love him that much, I wouldn't be shocked to see the Ravens move up 3 or 4 spots to try to get him. On the flip side, we know how deep this draft is. All the pundits have been talking about that for months. if there's 5 guys that they have graded very evenly when they're on the clock at 16, I wouldn't at all be surprised to see Ozzie Newsome move back 3 spots, knowing that they can get one of those 5 guys that they kind of have even as far as their grades go. So, when you're picking in the middle of the round, you feel hopeful that you're still going to be able to find a really high-impact player. Maybe not a Pro Bowler from year one, but you're hoping you can find an above-average player who can step in and start immediately. And you're hoping that you can do that, but trying to pinpoint who it's going to be, it just becomes so incredibly difficult. And it's just I have a really open mind as far as what the Ravens can do with that 16th overall pick, but not going to lie, the thought of taking one of the tackles, I'm just, based on what you hear and some of the warts on these tackle prospects, I'm not as enthused about that idea, even though I fully understand that, hey, got to have someone line up at right tackle.
I like it when Joe Flacco's standing upright. I like it when the running game's working.
Yeah.
I like all that to work, so I guess I do want a right tackle, right?
Yeah, but it's just a matter of, are any of those prospects right for the 16th overall pick, and that certainly remains to be seen.
He is Luke at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, covering the Orioles all week long, getting us ready for the draft in a couple of weeks. I'm getting ready for some Caps and some Maple Leafs, the Wizards into the playoffs. It is a wonderful, wonderful time to be talking sports. We're mixing it up, a little bit of everything around here. It's all in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault, 24 hours a day. If you miss it here on the radio, you can listen to what you want, when you want, where you want, how you want, no static at all, via the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's powered up by Planet Fitness and planetfitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life there. Last but never least, breaking news happens first. Out on the WNST Tech Service, that's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis Kolatzos will be here on Thursday, driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend, maybe a little bit of hockey in there as well. We'll see. I'll talk to Dennis about that. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We got our trip to London. We're waiting on that NFL schedule, not this phony preseason nonsense. I'm talking about Green Bay, Nashville, Minnesota, the Raiders. We'll be getting all that on sale next week for you as well. If you want to participate in our London trip, we are offering the $100 off discount right now, but you have to email me to get that, nasty at WNST.net. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.